Hey Joe, what were you doing 21 years ago?
Ooh, 21 years ago. Yeah. Uh, but this is junior year of high school. This is a pretty solid year for me. This is a good friend group. Still struggling to talk to women and not being awkward with it. Um, and yeah, pretty much where I was in a solid layer of awkwardness. How about you, Mark?
That's a shame. Just about a year removed from that, literally a year behind you. But if there was one thing that I was doing consistently, though, it was finding an excuse to be in a movie theater because back then we didn't have on demand. So I actually went to go see things when they came out. And
Yeah.
can't really do that these days, but such a film in 2003 was in theaters, known as The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
Yeah, and many of you may not have seen this, as shown by the box office results of this movie. It was one where it did struggle in the larger theaters, but I think at least for two people on this podcast, holds a special place in our hearts. Hope it does for you too.
Let's take a moment to talk about that though, because I think history remembers the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen differently than what actually happened. Because for one, it had a budget of $78 million, which for the time was pretty high for a property that not a lot of people really even knew about. And by the end of its theatrical run, as well as its early home sales, which include DVDs, if you remember that old, tired technology,
Oh man.
it actually made $260 million by the time it was all said and done.
Yeah, that's not bad. It's actually pretty darn good. Over doubled it. Like over tripled it. Like that's pretty good.
Based off of what I know, Joe, we're just talking about box office mechanics and what people consider a good investment. This seems to tick that box, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I would say so. Cause yeah, I just remember people like saying they didn't like this movie, but like clearly it performed well. People went and saw it maybe more than once, given those sales numbers. But then again, also it was a different time. Like bad movies could financially do well. I think and then this isn't even something you could attribute to like flood sales, which is something that a lot of movies of this time and before would do, where they would just really pump out some solid advertising to make the movie look better than it is. Godzilla '98. And then just make a ton of money that opening weekend to make up for the lack of goodness that was the movie. But I say this is not that case. It should not be that case.
Well, let's talk about just for a moment, Joe. It's been 21 years, but why don't we talk about first impressions? So 21-year first impressions, Joe. Do you remember what the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen looked like to you? Like just talking about advertisements, right? Face value. Did you know anything about it? What did you think about what you saw from that campaign?
If you could have literally more or less Endgame, but skip the 20 movies before it, that's this movie. That's basically what it looked like. It was high stakes. The world was at stake, which yeah, Endgame is like the universe is at stake. But for 2003, the world's pretty big all on its own. So huge stakes, and they got a team together, Mark. A team of extraordinary gentlemen, and like it was well done. Like because like the cast, I would say at the time I was probably only really familiar with two of the cast members. I would say going into this movie, but I liked both of them in what I had seen them in. I mean, because obviously who doesn't like Sean Connery? So you've got him in the mix. So everyone like that gets people in the seats right there. But at the same time, it has this grandiose feel because of one, the sheer amount of like literary characters that come together to be in this movie, as well as, and this is the one thing I'm going to say like didn't age too terribly well, is the amount of CGI that is in this movie. It really does try, and like you would, for the time, it was definitely plausible. It was definitely passable for the time, but like some things now, like it just doesn't quite look as impressive as it did in 2003. But in 2003, the CGI was kind of as big as it was promised to be for everything that was this movie.
I think what's interesting to maybe paint a picture of is that this film is directed by Stephen Norrington, who at the time had just come off of adapting Blade, which was one of those disconnected Marvel films that, while entertaining, Joe, I feel it captures the same vibe you're talking about, which is we're off to a decent start, but I don't quite know if we achieved what we set out to do. And while I don't hate the first Blade movie, I mean, it's still kind of campy and, of that era. 2, I think, was obviously much better. And we won't talk about 3 at all because that's just not worth our time. But to your point, Joe, it's for the time it feels kind of risky. That's what I thought when I first saw the trailer for it because, for one, I grew up reading actually a lot of these Victorian era books that were basically being adapted and taken out all these characters out of. So I had some familiarity with it, but when you present them as like superheroes, I start to go, well.
That could be a tough sell.
Yeah, I just think like when I think of some of these old age characters, these Victorian era literature characters, I think of like Human Plus. I think of like these are people who maybe just have faster reflexes or obviously just dress very well. But that's not like that's not superhero by any means. And so when you present that in a trailer, I remember seeing Sean Connery like hitting the guy with like his fist, but it doesn't look very natural because he's much older. And there's that one point where he has that guy that like falls to his knees and he hits him, and it just looks really weird. I didn't quite know what was going on with that because I'd never read The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. I had no idea about this comic property and what they were going for, which brings us to Alan Quartermain, Joe, this gentleman that Sean Connery portrays, as you have mentioned. I mean, who the hell is Alan Quartermain?
If you're unfamiliar with Alan Quartermain, he is a like everything else Victorian era literary character who is known for his like precision marksmanship, specifically as a big game hunter. He has what was it? Was it the I'm trying to remember like the book where he first appears, like the King's Diamond Mine or something. It's something with a mine.
King Solomon's Mines.
King Solomon's Mine. That's where it is. Yes. Where you meet him, I think, at the age of 55, where he's already kind of like on his decline, and he is basically still doing the big game hunting, but he as a character is someone who lives in South Africa because he despises England's climate and people, so he prefers to be there. And in his older age, he realizes that his main line of profession, his main skill, is basically killing off the wild that he loves in the area. So he's hunting still, solely as like a way of life, and it's very regrettable for him. But that's like, I mean, in the novels, to my knowledge, that is his one claim to fame. He's not a brawler. He does not do great with fisticuffs. He is a marksman, and he knows how to hunt. He knows how to shoot very well. That's what he does. Kind of like one person shovels, and he shovels well. He hunts, and he hunts well.
So, Joe, what Alan Quartermain kind of represents is this era of humanity that obviously you and I were not alive for, which is this concept of adventuring hunters, these worldwide travelers who are going for the big game hunt. And I'm not going to get into how South Park depicted these individuals because, frankly, that's just not content that is very wholesome. But this is kind of a funny little callback to that, isn't it? Like it's this old gentleman's club just sitting out in the middle of Africa, late 1800s. What could possibly be going on out there?
I imagine just shooting things for the crown. Like, hey, we've never seen that before. What should we do? Shoot it and put it on the wall. And then we brag about how many shots it took us to take it down. The fewer the shots, the greater the gentleman. That's just, it kind of seems what's going on. Is like, that's how it was done once upon a time. Instead of trying to like leave as small a footprint as you can, it was like, no, we're putting the flag here and this is ours now. So it's a different mentality. It is easy to look back at history and judge it for what it was at the time. But that's what they were. That's what they did.
And really, it just kind of paints up this Quartermain character as not very heroic. He's just kind of sitting out there waiting to die, which is kind of an unfortunate end for, an adventurer. And he's literally being recruited, like as you mentioned, Joe, by England's crown to find out if he would help them lead this League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. And he's actually recruited, Joe, by a different named character in the movie, but in the graphic novel comic series, he's actually recruited by the grandfather of James Bond.
Oh.
Which is kind of interesting. Because,
given what happens in the movie, that is very interesting.
Well, it's kind of funny how the comic series builds this fictional universe, which is believed to be where like all of our fictional literature characters kind of live. Like this is the actual universe of that. You know, it's like Once Upon a Time by ABC, obviously not a sponsor, but with like just, you know, think of your older Victorian era books. This is where all those folks live. This is the place they are. You know, I kind of dig it.
Yeah, and I think what we should probably establish is why the Crown is going all the way to South Africa to bring Quartermain back to England. And in 1899, what could be more perilous than a world war? We have a series of incidents that happen in the UK, where we have banks being robbed, plans being stolen by what appears to be a German tank, and then we have Germany saying we didn't do it, and then over in Germany you've got what appears to be British soldiers looting and robbing things, and England's of course like, no, we didn't do it. So the world's being tossed into chaos by this shadowy figure who is wearing a mask. And very reminiscent, which I believe even at one point Quartermain refers to as operatic. Operatic?
Operatic, yeah.
Operatic, yes.
Yes.
As we have the next of our very Victorian age characters, who is the Phantom of the Opera, more or less going around and doing all of these things, trying to throw the world at war. And thus, it is time to party like it's 1899 and get the gang together. So more than just Quartermain, we have quite the cast of characters, Mark. Give us one more that we add to the fray here.
I will give a few more, but I have to absolutely point out that the Phantom looks like Rob Zombie with a mask on. I just got to say. like
Rob Zombie with a touch of Hugh Hefner with the big velvet robe that he's got on.
Yeah, when he's not causing world war, he's banging in his Dragula, you know, I mean, or riding in the back of his Dragula. But yes, the personalities of the League, of course, do encapsulate quite a few people. Of which I will go a little rapid fire here because the movie does the same thing. We're introduced to Captain Nemo, of course, of the Nautilus, which Jules Verne inspired. We've got the Invisible Man. Sorry, there's a B in that word. Invisible Man, who is technically not the original one. He's actually the guy who stole the patent of the original. And so now he owns the secret sauce of that technology.
I mean, it's basically modern Ant-Man, right?
I mean,
the original Ant-Man. He is the guy who was really good at stealing things and ended up as Ant-Man.
And I've got to say, when it comes to the Invisible Man, I feel like his depiction in the film is where a lot of the CGI money had to have been dedicated. Oh, yeah. And I'll explain more of this later. But when you first see him, there's obviously no form, and then he paints that white stuff he puts white paint on his face so you can see him, and admittedly that actually looks pretty good for 2003.
It really does. It's very impressive at the level of depth that you really see of like when he's turning his face and you can see like through it at different, like obviously he's invisible, Joe Bell, but like it's hard to describe. I'll have some video up here as it goes, but like it does look very impressive for 2003, and it doesn't come off corny. And if you are familiar with some Doctor Who, you will know the actor who plays the Invisible Man is also Vincent Van Gogh in an episode of Doctor Who.
Yeah, which it takes some doing to recognize that, because obviously this guy is covered in makeup and CGI the whole film. Now, when I say makeup, though, I do have to take a step back and make fun of this for a moment, because it is very clearly obvious when it's the makeup Invisible Man versus the CGI Invisible Man, because his stubble is present, his whole head is usually covered, and so when those moments happen, you're just like, oh yeah, they had to cut some corners here, but it looks good when they do it.
It does. It looks really fine. But I think the importance to know is like when you're really doing this with Tony Curran, who is our Invisible Man, it's fun to really show like they are trying to show off that CGI when they use him, because again, like you said, there are scenes where he's got his face completely covered in the makeup from like front to back, so the actor can actually just kind of nicely be on screen every once in a while. But yeah, whenever they do like there's something on him, they're just showing off the CGI that they could do at the time.
Yeah.
And again, for 2003, pretty solid.
It's not bad. I mean,
Not bad at all.
but rounding out some of the ranks here, though, we have Mina, who is technically a vampire hunter and worked to actually tackle Dracula with Van Helsing, and ends up becoming a vampire herself, which is a little bit of a I don't know. I wouldn't call it a red. Yeah, it's a little bit of a twist, which is kind of fun at first.
Yeah, and this is Mina Harker, the wife of Jonathan Harker,
Yes.
obviously from Bram Stoker's Dracula, played by Petra Wilson, who our elder millennials and Gen Z will recognize as La Femme Nikita. Because this was the only other person other than Sean Connery who went to see this movie who I recognized. I'm like, I know La Femme Nikita. That's awesome. Look at her go.
Well, we're gonna skip past some actors' names because we're trying to do a lot in a little bit of time. But we're also we're also introduced to Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. We're introduced to Sawyer, who is this American Yahoo who is firing a lot of weapons and not hitting a whole lot of things with them. And
one might say that the real Tom Sawyer is in a bit of a rush. If I was being honest here.
God damn it, Joe. Well, the final person in this league, however, is Dorian Gray, who seemingly has an unlimited supply of suits that keep getting ruined. I'm not quite sure how that works out.
Well, when you're an immortal, you got time to put money away and really just buy a lot of that same suit like you're a cartoon character.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's that part where he gets shot multiple times in the chest, and the guy has to rip off the front of the suit as he's falling down. And I'm like, hold on a second. How cheap is that suit? Because the bullets didn't do that.
No.
Yeah.
And that guy falling down wasn't like Hulkamania or anything. He was just a dude.
Yeah. This wasn't
but and again, like another just also fun way to show off the CGI of the time of actually seeing the body like recompose itself.
Yeah.
Is pretty great. And there's even a part where he does get into a tussle with another immortal in this movie, and after like you see scratching and scarring and healing, he just goes, we'll be at this all day.
I know.
Fun little nod, like great little humor that movie has here and there.
It does. The only thing that's not so humorous is that Stuart Townsend, who portrayed Dorian Gray, one-time portrayal of Aragorn in Lord of the Rings, long before the cameras were actually turned on. I feel like after this, he kind of disappears. He doesn't really recover much as an actor, but I don't know. It's one of those, you'll point at him and you'll recognize him, and then you won't see him again in many other films. But to that point, Joe, this movie ends up becoming the Avengers, but long before the Avengers.
Yeah.
I mean, it's at least in cinematic form. And honestly, I have a hard time not feeling like Marvel ripped off this movie.
Well, I mean, it's hard not to. And again, like I will always love the era when you have like the ensemble cast and that's all you have. Like that's the starting point where like we get the backstories of them as they go along through their subtext or their interactions with each other, and there is a bit of conflict with things. And even like rewatching this movie, when you see Hyde and Nemo interact with each other when they're on the Nautilus, and Nemo is very like, I will not have the monster like roaming around on my ship. Do I have to take care of this now? And he's got his hand on his sword. Very reminiscent of like people being afraid of Bruce Banner being on the helicarrier. Like there are so many little things like that, and obviously like Bruce Banner and Dr. Jekyll, very reminiscent of each other, of becoming these big rage monsters. Like there are a lot of really, really small, subtle things like that show like, yeah, this feels like the Avengers, but wait, this was well before that. Not to like take anything away, because I'm not out. We're not out to cheapen the MCU. We loved that ride from the Infinity Saga, from start to finish, from Iron Man to Infinity, not to Infinity, we're into Endgame. Like we loved it. It was fantastic cinema, but it does feel like they like took things from this movie, like, hey, these things worked well. we can incorporate some of these same things into our films.
It's hard not to see it, especially now, right? I mean, obviously, the MCU did a great job of building up everything to a central point, of course, but this was a movie that didn't have a chance to do that, and they had to cram all these adjoining storylines together in a very short period of time. What I do like about the Nautilus is that it does take on this larger-than-life appearance than what book readers would probably give it as a reputation. And Nemo even calls it the Sword of the Seas. And I mean, it literally looks like a sword with a with a little bubble on it. I mean, it's a pretty impressive looking thing.
And I think that's again the impressive. It's incredibly ornate from bow to stern, inside and out. It is you would think a submarine should just be very plain and sleek, and it is both sleek, but it's not utilitarian. Instead of I don't know if anyone has ever been aboard a submarine, you get very claustrophobic really fast, even if you are not claustrophobic. And this thing is I think it's a veritable country all by itself, just going through the water. It is all that in a bag of potato chips, as we once used to say.
What I will say, though, Joe, is that for 2003, I do feel like the realm of superhero cinematic writing isn't quite there yet. And this part of the movie, I think, represents that perfectly, because you have all these characters coming together who have no reason to trust each other. They don't know each other at all. And then, but seemingly, I'll have to actually take back those words immediately, because while they don't know each other personally, they don't know each other personally, but they know about some of the things that these people have done. And so, but unfortunately, like I said, scripting isn't that strong for this era. And so we don't have a chance to explore really any of those things. Multiple people call Nemo a pirate, which you're like, okay, he sails the seas. Maybe he's stolen a ship or two. Maybe he's the captain now. I get it. But it doesn't really get much further explained than that. So you're just kind of like,
no.
Damn.
No, there's a moment where, again, I think it's Nemo and, God, was it Jekyll? No, it's Quartermain. I think they're talking to each other, and Quartermain apologizes for calling. He's like, "I apologize for calling you a pirate," and he's like, "Well, was it entirely not true?"
Yeah.
He has some sort of line like that, but yeah, it is like you said. Some parts of it do feel like it's a bit of a patchwork. In this greater quilt of a movie that we have coming together, some things don't exactly work. And again, the suspicion among the characters over just knowing each other by reputation and how that plays into the movie, kind of hit or miss here and there. And I would definitely agree that for this time, a lot of superhero movie writing isn't all that great, because this is in the same era that we've got Affleck Daredevil, which obviously didn't do very well. Tom Jane Punisher, which we both liked. We both enjoyed Tom Jane Punisher,
didn't do well.
Didn't do well. I mean, Superman Returns, which, for all of its faults, I still enjoy Superman Returns. It has one of probably the best Superman scene ever in a movie with the airplane. Was incredible. But yeah, no, outside of the Dark Knight trilogy, superhero movies were pretty hit or miss. Most of them being misses. Not quite the video game flops of the time and time before, but this movie was had a lot working against itself just for modern cinema at the time.
I think it's because they tried to do too much in a short time of the movie, because the whole first, I would say 40 minutes, maybe even 50 minutes of the movie is just introducing people and getting them to have to interact with each other. Yeah. And then actually building any semblance of bonding and story happens within this really truncated time when they're on the Nautilus together, and trying to get, because they're trying to get to Paris to prevent our Phantom from sinking the entire city on stilts, Venice. Venice, yes. Which I have to say, there is something about that makes absolutely no sense at all. Does Venice actually have a cemetery on it? I thought they had an island where they bury everyone, and suddenly, because they just suddenly walk through this doorway and they're in a cemetery, and I'm like, what cemetery is in Venice? Because the same thing goes for Paris. They moved a lot of the cemeteries out of Paris, out of Venice. Paris is running out of room. Venice, of course, is literally on stilts. Like, there's not going to be a cemetery there.
I mean, all my time playing Assassin's Creed, I never saw a cemetery, to my knowledge. So, yep.
I was going to say, dude, I mean, Ezio may have, said his rest in peace many times, but it was never because there was an imminent burial right on site. So
It's a very thing that I think a lot of people miss is that when Ezio is saying the Requiescat in Pace and he's putting the eyes down, he's actually putting a stamp on the forehead of everyone he's killing. Shipped out of there. Just
yeah, I
gone.
am fighting really hard not to do my Ezio voice, Joe. I hope you can understand just how hard it is for me to not use that voice after all that preparation. But as we've discussed, they have to head to solve some pretty big impending World War I problems, which of course they do their damnedest to do this. But ultimately, it does seem like a movie that can't quite get the fire started. You're seeing some sparks. Maybe we're trying to do the whole manual, rubbing the sticks together to get it to go, but it's not quite happening, which, Joe, leads me to ask you, and myself, of course, after you, why do people hate this movie so much?
I would actually say one thing we like half praised it for was the pretty good CGI at the time. I would say the effects do struggle from here and there, where some things will come off a little too cheesy or corny or clunky. I would say, and this doesn't happen often. Like Mina Harker's like full-on vampire doesn't look good. Where she's actually flying and she's surrounded by bats and she's doing like super crazy vampire stuff, that struggles every time it happens, which is only like twice, but it struggles. And I think the clunkiest thing, and one thing that I'm still not over, is definitely the appearance of Mr. Hyde. It just looks like a big clumsy prosthetic that the actor is in.
Well, he is. He literally is.
He's in a huge clumsy prosthetic, but it looks that way too, where everything's a fist, and it just doesn't seem to work well. Where, like, if we compare it to another around that time happening of Van Helsing, that Dr. Jekyll I think worked a lot more, and he was pure CGI. I think that was part of the struggle for me, is some of the visuals just don't work in the movie, and they don't work to the point where sometimes they just literally take you out of the movie.
I have to say the CGI of this film, as I pointed out earlier, Joe, it gets off to a good start when you're talking about the Invisible Man. He looks really great. But then as the movie goes on, though, like the first appearance of the Nautilus, when it pops up out of the water, it's like, could we darken that background a bit more to not show that off? I mean, and it's obviously, I get it. It's lo-fi. This is not the 4K era. This is a very lo-fi looking thing. But to the point, Joe, I actually think that the Hyde suit looks better, and I'll explain why. It's because later in the movie, when we see that the Phantom, who ends up developing the League's own powers and everything into a war kit for the world, when they have the hyped up Hyde who drinks like a gallon of it, if you want to talk about Hydes that look bad, it's the Endgame Hyde compared to the in-suit Hyde, because good Lord, dude, at least the suited up Hyde, he looks gorilla-like, he's moving around like his hands do curl over as if he were a gorilla. Like, there are some things that make sense there. But yeah, as the movie goes on, there are definitely points where it's like, I think they put all their money into the Invisible Man CGI, and then they just were like, how much time do we have left for the rest of this? Damn. All right. Let's do what we can.
Because that's the thing. Like, I would even say, I can't. Cause I'm even trying to say, the CGI did not ruin the movie by itself.
No. No.
But I'm trying to think of performances, because I think honestly weakest performance is probably Tom Sawyer.
Oh, easily.
I'm just not I'm never really sold on him. Like he's not cocky enough to pull off I guess the cocky way that, or the demeanor at which his cockiness is perceived by the rest of the team. That doesn't really feel like he's really doing that well enough. And at no point does it seem like he ever really grows in the movie. And I think that was supposed to be the purpose of the movie, especially when you set this up with the the scene with him and Quartermain shooting buoys off the bow of the Nautilus is that getting him to be more patient and getting him to time himself off and not being so terribly American by shooting a bunch of bullets and eventually hitting something, because he only actually does that once in the movie. Also, kind of odd that was necessary when you see the first appearance of Tom Sawyer. Or first-ish appearance of Tom Sawyer, he's shooting just fine. He kind of saves and bails everyone out with his marksmanship.
Yeah.
So, subtle things that like small plot holes, enough of them add up, and yeah, a couple weak performances kind of hurt the whole thing.
Which sucks because I feel like obviously Sean Connery is doing the most he can with what he's got, and I mean the character of Quartermain obviously has been through a lot of shit, and so for him to be feeling some pretty complex emotions with the loss of his son, the loss of his wife, like he's clearly been through this before. So this idea of like him handing off the torch to Sawyer, you can get what they're trying to accomplish with it, but he delivers what he can. I just don't think he's met at the same intensity as the rest of the cast, and whether that's experience or just maybe not enough caffeine on that day, it's very clear that there's something missing just a little bit. And what I think this also suffers from, Joe, as you called out Van Helsing before, these movies are tied by Richard Roxburgh, who plays the Phantom and Moriarty, also plays Dracula and Van Helsing. Love the actor.
Yep.
Like Roxburgh, I love the dude. I think he's fantastic. I think he's great. He depicts this old era of like 30s acting and horror so well. I love that kind of stuff. But Joe, are people sick like of old age horror? Because it seems like in the early 2000s, nobody wanted it.
No, I think we've talked about this before. How like the Universal monsters like just struggled and still do to this day. They still struggle. The only thing that has really had a lot of success is The Mummy, and that was when Brendan Fraser was in it. And as soon as he left the equation, and you tried putting Tom Cruise in there, hated it again. It just didn't work. Like, there's something just so difficult to try and replicate with how those monsters worked in the the 40s and 50s that we just can't really seem to ever recapture. And God, it's generational, because even in the 80s you tried getting Monster Squad, and while that's its own cult classic, flopped. Like it just got crushed. It was horribly embarrassed in the theater. So I think I think it's just very hard to adapt these characters to a modern audience and still kind of make them intriguing and work, even with some good acting, which I'd like to throw in Nasiruddin Saha, who plays Captain Nemo. I think he did fantastic. He is, I think, kind of like my hands down favorite of the movie as far as his performance.
Put some respect on Nasiruddin Shah, please. Let's get that last name right. That man is amazing. I love his depiction as Nemo. So, Joe, if there's actually like a cinema scene or a cinema sin that we need to call out, it's the idea that there's not enough time between Captain Nemo, okay, and then Alan Quartermain, because the two of them, I think, need to be built up a little bit more together, similar to how Captain America and Iron Man get built up together. Tie their fates together in some way to yes, they build respect, but there's always some shifting sand to that whole dynamic, right? I think that would be a better idea.
Oh, completely, because you have two characters who have the utmost respect of everyone basically around them, within their immediate circles and the outer circles to themselves, because when you see Nemo interact with his men, and when he goes out and being the captain of the ship and always getting his hands dirty when he's going out and fighting, you can understand why people follow Nemo very, very well when you see him work with his, I would say, I was going to say seamen, but that's weird. It's always weird to refer to them as seamen.
Nah, just call him his seamen. No, just call him his seamen. The whole ship is white on the inside. All their outfits are white. I mean, come on. It's like somebody knew.
White gloves. They're hiding it, and they know
this ship is covered in semen. Top to bottom. You know what, though? I actually wrote this in the notes, Joe, that the crew of the Nautilus are like the MVP of this movie, especially Ishmael, who's his first mate. Because when the Nautilus is getting sunk and blown up and everything, the guy's going, "We're going to be crushed," and then Ishmael's like, "The captain says we stay, we stay," and I'm like, I'm like, oh man, Ishmael's
Yeah.
not screwing around. Okay, he's earning that keep. I'm like,
He
and
is, yeah. And then when you watch like the raid on the castle, which is the final battle in this, and Nemo is like first in line constantly going into battle
Yeah.
and doing things. Everyone's following him. It's like just incredible performance.
yeah, dude, Shaw is amazing, and I wish he was in more Western things. But at this point, his age is probably going to kick him out of it a little bit. But one last question, Joe: should someone try to revive this for a modern audience? Because honestly, I feel like if it came out 10, 15 years later, we may not be talking about a bomb as much.
Interesting. I don't know. I think we still be talking about a bomb, and it's mostly because what's going to happen, and I think what would happen is that they would probably try and do this the MCU way. They'd try and model after that very successful style of giving a character a movie and then getting all the characters a movie and then bringing them together. And you would try doing that, and when you look at the cast of characters, like we said, the Universal monsters, like they're struggling. So right there, Mina Harker is going to be a very, very tough sell. Like if you try doing Dracula and like the moderate amount of success that character's had over the years, obviously huge in the 50s, and after that, all of them else. Yeah, and then even Dorian Gray, that's a boring-ass first movie.
That's true.
It's just him being Dorian Gray, like, not dying because his portrait's keeping him alive. So, like, any one of those, like, goes away, and then you can't do this big movie. Or, I mean, if you try doing, like, even, like, the DC route after that and how much that flopped, yeah, you could have it. You could have, like, Man of Steel does like, I think it like sales does well, does fine, but then Batman versus Superman's horrible. Wonder Woman does great, and then it just kind of cobbles itself together. I think we'd probably see something very similar with this group.
See, what I think would be great is if you have a start where it's like Quartermain has to be asked to hunt like Hyde or Harker, to your point. And then you can take these characters that maybe can't do a movie on their own and give them a reason to have to interact with each other, and then expand that out into the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, right? And maybe there's some of these things that one of these characters was involved with that could help actually be a precursor to World War One. And then they feel bad about it, and they're like, oh shit, I got to redeem myself, you know? Like that kind of thing I think could work cinematically. And I mean, if they only had more time, Joe, which unfortunately you and I have run out of course. But with that, we thank you for listening to Digital Dissection. As always, we appreciate everything the crew does for us week after week. Your support does go a very long way. And if you like this episode, check us out on YouTube, where we make weekly videos about our favorite things.
We also love hearing from you, so feel free to message us over at digitaldissectionpodcast@gmail.com or our communities across social media. We love your ideas, suggestions, and, well, pretty much anything so long as it's tastefully done. And until next time, keep on dissecting.